people, whether they're, in certain sectors, whether it's military, whether it's, the public sector, private sector. We want to let them know how easy it can be to come into emergency management, and also give them a platform to where they can connect with folks who have been there and who have also taken so many different directions and journeys to get into our field. And hopefully we can share some of those directions. We can share some of the pitfalls that we faced, so you can avoid them. And then we can also share some of the successes and the great times that we've had coming into the field. So I just want to say thank you all for joining us. And we do have a lovely panel set up for you today. So I'll give it over to our moderator for today, Chauncia Willis, and we'll get started. So thank you all for participating.
Outstanding. Thank you, Louis. Hello, everyone. Oh my goodness. I don't know if you're prepared, but I am. I have my coffee right here. It's Cafe con leche, and I am ready to go. Super hyped and excited about tonight in our discussion. So this is going to be interesting because what we're essentially going to be talking about is how to enter the emergency management profession. And we're going to be describing our individual experiences and also hopefully framing a collective perspective about the field of emergency management that our participants tonight will find valuable. So what I'd like to do is have each person introduce yourself, maybe take 2 minutes to just give us a brief introduction of who you are, where you came from, and what led you to the field of emergency management. 2 minutes each, so don't give us a whole, resume, CV, and all that good stuff. Just 2 minutes. Why don't we start with the one who's furthest away, Kristina?
Thank you, Chauncia. Hello, everyone. So my name is Kristina, and I'm actually based in France currently, in Europe. I work, I guess I'm coming from an international emergency management background, and I've been working with the United Nations for the last 10 years in Africa, the Middle East, and in headquarters. So I'm hoping today I can tell you, those of you who are interested, what it's like to work internationally and how to start a career in that field. For me, it just started from, a desire to help. So I'll just stop here for now, but happy to be here and nice to meet everyone.
Yes, I thought you were going to say bonjour or something like that.
Bonjour.
All right, let's move on to Walter. Walter English, tell us what you got going on.
Hey, good evening. My name is Walter English. I'm an emergency manager in the city of Fairfax, Virginia, here on the East Coast. So just a few hours earlier than Kristina. I think what kind of drove me to emergency management was I wanted to make a difference and see a change. It's kind of what a lot of people say, but in emergency management, you could actually affect change, and you can see it with every disaster and emergency. And with disparities with certain races and classes, you yourself can make a difference within the community. So I came back to a community that I grew up near, and it gave me a chance to really affect change, and that's why I got into emergency management.
Outstanding.
I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Definitely. EmilyJane.
Hi, everyone. I'm EmilyJane Zahardin. I have been in emergency management for about 8 years, and I got into emergency management through my master's in public administration. So I worked at a nonprofit. I started the master's program, and I quickly switched my concentration and my focus, and then just dropped right into emergency management. So that's sort of how I found my way. It was unintentional in a lot of ways. But what keeps me coming back and really looped me in or hooked me into emergency management was exactly what Walter said, which is it's the opportunity to really directly help people. I knew that, I can't hack it as a police officer. I can't hack it as a firefighter, but I wanted to be sort of as close as I could be to the front lines while still helping people in a really meaningful, impactful way.
Yeah, no, I totally get it. I thought I might become a doctor, and then I realized I'm afraid of anything that looks like a needle, anything like that. I don't like it. So why don't we go ahead, and Tammy, if you have those poll questions ready, we'll go ahead and dive into some poll questions.
Sure, there's just two, and it's just for us to get an idea on our panelists, or I'm sorry, not our panelists, our attendees. So our panelists know how they better gear some of their answers. So we'll go ahead and leave this open for a few minutes. I'll try to get as many answers close to matching the attendees as possible.
All right, and I see Ryan is on, and he says, "Hi, Walter, it's good to see you. Thanks for sharing your insight." And Walter, it's going to be interesting speaking with you because you are the first responder on the panel. So you can provide that level of insight, certainly the transition and the differences from one field to another. And
we'll give everybody about 10 more seconds here.
All right. And I don't know, Tammy Lewis, did I introduce myself? I think I did. Okay, Chauncia Willis. Just making sure.
All right, I'm gonna go ahead and cap off polling. It looks like the majority is bachelor's with a few masters thrown in there. Associates, it's pretty tight right there as far as level of education. As far as years in the industry, it is pretty one-ended there on 1 to 3 years, with a little bit having 10 plus and nobody in the middle.
Oh, wow. Okay. That's interesting. I find that very interesting. And, I'll just provide a reminder to everyone, if you have any questions, go ahead and drop them in the QA feature down there so we can get to those questions while we're talking tonight. So most people have about 1 to 3 years experience in emergency management. So that's good stuff for the panelists to kind of understand. Are there any other polling questions that we want to get to?
That is all I have.
All right. Well, why don't we jump into it, because we really don't have a lot of time to spend together tonight. And one of the fascinating things that I think we will uncover tonight is the fact that emergency management has no certain doorway to entry. So you can come into the field of emergency management through a gazillion different ways, right? And each way is valuable and adds and contributes to the field. I know myself, I came into emergency management as an intern in graduate school, and my first salary was $17,000. And it wasn't that long ago. I mean, 20 something years ago, but I mean, it sounds longer than it actually is. Let me just tell you, okay? Goes by like that. Great career in emergency management. But I know that even that is considered a more traditional route. So why don't we hear from you on how you got into the field of emergency management, and what doorway you used to enter, and what you would recommend to those interested in entering the field of emergency management, the good, the bad, the ugly. Take 3 minutes to answer that. Kristina, I know you came in and have a more international perspective, and you've done work with the United Nations and other non-traditional organizations. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I mean, my path is actually quite traditional, like yours, I think. I mean, I became interested in emergency management and humanitarian work in college. So I took some classes in nonprofit management while in college. I volunteered during the summer with a small student NGO. And then I went on, I got a master's actually specializing in humanitarian action. And so my formal career started with an internship. I was applying, and then one organization responded, and it happened to be the United Nations. And so I started with a 6-month internship at the World Food Program. And from then on, it turned into a consultancy and a full-time job. And here I am 10 years later.
Right. And that's so interesting, because most people don't think that there are emergency managers all around the world. right? Doing different things. And we all have a very unique way of entering the field. Now, EmilyJane, I know that you mentioned that you came in through a nonprofit doorway. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So after I graduated from college, I had concentrated in political science and public policy. I started working with the military support nonprofit, and we had 13 facilities, and someone tasked me with coming up with continuity plans for each facility, which today, no big deal. That sounds fantastic. But at the time, I didn't know what continuity meant. Mm-hmm. Realistically, probably didn't know what FEMA stood for. But I started with the IS classes. I got in there with 100, 700, really went deep in the IS bank of classes. And I just really enjoyed continuity. It was really fun. It was really cool for me to be able to think through all the things that our business or our nonprofit would need to do to continue its mission of supporting military service members. And sort of from that perspective, I made the leap into emergency management. So that's when I changed my focus in the public administration master's program that I was in. I had taken one nonprofit class, and I said, this really isn't for me. And I signed up for an emergency management class, and it all sort of clicked. It came together, the realization that I want to be able to help, but I'm not the right person to be on the front line. So how close can I get to that? And from being in that master's program is how I found my first job. So one of my the alums from my program came back to the school and said, hey, we're looking for some students. We'd really love to hire people out of this master's program, and we're looking for emergency managers. And so that's how I landed my first job, which was on Capitol Hill doing emergency management for them.
Outstanding. They're making me jealous. My first job was not like this. I was organizing books inside the emergency management library. So I'm a little jelly over here. Walter, now you are a legacy emergency manager. Tell us a little bit about the legacy that you represent and how you came into emergency management.
Well, I came into emergency management, which some would consider a traditional role. I came in through the fire department. I started out as a firefighter paramedic, which was really a part-time job when I was attending school. And then after I graduated with my bachelor's, I went full-time and they paid for my master's. And then I was actually working special events. And working special events, I worked in the EOC, and I got to see how you could affect change globally versus one at a time. So being on the fire department, I felt like I was making a change only one person at a time or one call at a time. And emergency management was more of a more strategic perspective. So it really kind of pulled me in to see that change. I actually grew up in an emergency management household. My mother retired out of FEMA as the actually top non-appointed SES. So I grew up with 30 years of FEMA, and I spent many of my childhood days running around the floors of C streets during hurricanes. So you can say it was kind of in my blood and I was destined to get here. But one thing is, when you're little, you really don't understand what it is, and you don't understand why you're concerned with a Florida hurricane of Florida when you live in DC. So it was a whole different perspective once I grew up, but that's kind of how I got into it. It's in my blood. I have many folks in my family that have worked in emergency management in different capacities, and it's just kind of stuck, and it's a great way to have public service.
Yeah, emergency management, it allows you to have a great career doing something that you love. And it's something that I wish more people knew about, quite honestly, specifically more women and people of color and people of different backgrounds. Let me ask you another question, Walt. What are some ways that those who want to enter the field of emergency management, what are some ways that you would recommend they come into the field that maybe they haven't thought about? Because experience is highly valued in the field of emergency management. And sometimes, like we said, you might get one call back, not multiple. So you don't have as many opportunities to enter a field of, I think, less than 20,000 people. So what are your thoughts on that?
I think you have to think outside of the box on how you can get that experience. Right now, there's a lot of students that are graduating and all the resumes look the same. So you have to do something to stand out, whether that's an internship or taking a job that has an emergency management focus that might not be emergency management. Some folks forget that you can work with GIS and have a touch with that. You can work in, health and human services and have a touch. I actually worked doing crisis communications for a small nonprofit. And that was one of the ways that I got a lot of experience in the beginning. And their whole goal was they were working with homeless groups or other groups. And my job was to write some of their press releases when things would kind of go bad. And really was just getting that experience. So some of it is really just thinking outside of the box. Don't think the traditional method. I mean, as I sit here, because I got into the job traditionally, but you have to think outside the box. Whether there's so many jobs that have a connection, and there's so many people right now that work in emergency management that don't have emergency management degrees that came in through other means. One of my peers that works in Indianapolis, their whole background was doing mental health awareness. And they started working with the opioid crisis. And then they came into emergency management because it was beginning to be like a worldwide pandemic almost. So there's other ways to get in. You have to think outside the box and get that experience. If you're in college right now, go to the library, work in the library and start working on do group things so you can show that you have organizational leadership and that you can work with people of different backgrounds and you can get that leadership experience. You have to be able to show that you have the attributes. There's things that make an emergency manager, and it's not the title. It's the attributes that you bring to the job, and you can gain those in different places. So think outside the box.
Mm-hmm. I agree. When you talk about attributes, I mean, that's fantastic because for so long there was a profile of an emergency manager. And, essentially they didn't have much education. They were definitely male and definitely retired military or firefighting or law enforcement. And now emergency managers are very, very, very diverse in some ways, but they're also very well educated. So Emily, tell me about that. Now, you mentioned that you were working on your public administration degree, and that's similar to me, not having a definite certification there was no certification in emergency management when I started, right? Or a BA degree or any other graduate level degree for that matter. And now there's a plethora of different degree opportunities, but it's still the weight is still on experience. So tell us about that and tell us what your thoughts are on getting an emergency management education as a foundation.
So if someone came to me today and said, oh, I want to be an emergency manager, I think one of the things that would come to mind for most people is there's all the FEMA classes. And as I mentioned earlier, that's the way to start. And that's the way to get into starting to understand what emergency management is about. But FEMA has a huge gap there in that there is a whole range of higher education, meaning undergraduate and master's and doctoral concepts that aren't taught in the IS courses that you really need. Maybe you don't need, but it makes your life a lot easier to be able to sort of have some mastery of how governments work. And that's why that's why I pursued the master's in public administration, right? It's just like an MBA, but for how to work in a government. And so I found that to be incredibly helpful because if you're working at FEMA, if you're working at a state or a local level jurisdiction doing emergency management, if you're working at a nonprofit, it doesn't matter where you're working in at least I can say in the United States, you have to be interfacing with state, local, and federal elements of the government. And so I found that to be incredibly helpful and incredibly valuable. So to expand on that just a little bit, and I know we talked about 2-minute limits, and I'm trying to be really mindful of that. So feel free to interrupt me at any point.
You have to stick to it, or else Lewis will give me the eyes and he will say, hurry.
What I was going to say is that you can really have from my perspective, if I'm hiring, any background in government is very much what I'm looking for, because it's the ability to negotiate and navigate situations that can be very difficult or inflexible for sometimes seemingly ridiculous reasons, but that's just sort of what the situation is. And that ability to navigate and to be flexible and to work through challenges is so important. And that's why I think the public administration background is really a great foundation for coming into emergency management. Certainly not the only one, but I think that can be a really helpful step. And a great way to get experience, as Walter explained, with other organizations that might not be directly emergency management, but have a really big role in that, or get you that experience that you need.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree. Emergency management is such a relationship-based field. Like you really want to have that skill set, that ability to connect with people and to create partnerships and to really relate, because essentially our work is in service to people. And if you're not a people person, there still might be some places for you, but it'll be a little bit more challenging. I did a webinar today on immigrant and refugee populations. And this one is for you, Kristina, because it's very important to, I think, be aware that the clientele for emergency managers can be very diverse, and you have to have a very global perspective and appreciate the differences that everyone brings to the table. Can you give your perspective on what it's like to work in an international setting with different groups and different organizations that are not necessarily what we might be accustomed to in the United States? What's your perspective?
Of course, actually, it was interesting because I was listening to EmilyJane talk about how, she was working in a nonprofit and then she realized she wanted to be in emergency management. When you're working internationally, the line is blurred because the nonprofits are the ones who do the emergency work. And so I think that's a big difference, because not just because the actors are different, but also because if you look at emergencies today in the world, a lot of them are protracted, meaning they've been going on for years. If you take Syria, it's 10 years of conflict. So you're assisting the same communities for years at a time. And so that means that the type of response that you provide to them is different. So that might be the difference between distributing a food basket every month and actually giving people the means to plant food and grow it for themselves or buy it. So we're looking at more sustainable solutions in some contexts, even though it is an emergency. Another big difference, I think, is the context. So the skills might be the same. Actually, a lot of the skills that you might use in national emergency management is going to be similar, but the context might differ. So internationally, you might have natural disasters just like you would have in the US, so floods or drought, would have droughts or earthquakes or whatever it is. But you could also have war and conflict situations, which is quite different. And that's going to affect you as an emergency responder, because there's security concerns to take into account. You might be living in a compound. You might need to have armed escorts in some situations. You might have limited access to the very people you're trying to serve. So I say maybe these are two things to keep in mind when you're working internationally. And just in case it's not, just to clarify, so the actors that do provide the emergency assistance internationally, maybe it's obvious, but I'll just say it in case. So you have NGOs that might be international NGOs coming from, for example, the US, or they might be national NGOs who are already in the country. It might be United Nations agencies or Red Crescent organizations. The government might be involved in the response. In fact, they're always hosting, so they're inviting these organizations to work there. So you have different types of actors who can try to all working together in the response. Hopefully that's helpful.
Yes, it's very helpful. I kind of zeroed in on what you said about working in a conflict zone, because that is like, wow, that's got to be high pressure. I know, like, some of our colleagues who come in through first response are accustomed to being on site, working in high pressure situations and having to make decisions on the ground. But when you're coming into emergency management, that can be a little tricky. It's you know, when I was working with Atlanta Fulton County, I can remember thinking to myself, I'm terrified. They want me to go to the scene and stand next to the incident commander and ask to provide resources. They've changed the model now, and emergency managers don't deploy out to the field as much as we used to. But I can remember thinking I should be the last person to go to the scene. So I can only imagine for you working in and doing your job when there's conflict around you, it must be hard to focus sometimes, and hard to really think about, you know, the future past that moment. What is that like? And has there been a disaster that's giving you like an aha, like, gosh, this is why I'm here. This is why I'm doing what I do?
I don't know about the aha, but I think what marked me most was working in Yemen, because there it was, you know, I was based in Sana'a, the capital, which is under, so the official government is not there. You have an entity that's not recognized internationally that's controlling the area, which means that every time you need to move somewhere, so to go see a project, to go assist people, you actually have to demand to request an authorization to move. You do that in an armed convoy. You escort it everywhere you go. It's very, and you live in a compound. So basically your life is very limited. It's home to office, office to home, and that's it. And you're always with the same people. So imagine it's almost like being in a five-star prison, because you have barbed wire around you. I'm just trying to give a picture to people. You know, you have people with arms surrounding the compound to make sure that you're safe. And so what's odd is that it creates a distance between you and the very people you're trying to serve, because you kind of you're away from them. And so that's difficult, because you're in the country, but it's almost like you're not there. And at the same time, you have the pressures of, you know, being away from your family. Communications might not be as good. I mean, we take internet for granted, but when there's an emergency, the communications aren't as good. You might have a time difference. So keeping in touch with your family is with loved ones can be hard. And then you go outside and you see what's actually happening on the ground, and the emergency that's brought on by the war or conflict usually comes on top of poverty that was already there. And so it's difficult. And just to add, I think what I found most hard is that in situations of conflict, you need authorizations to do every little thing. And so sometimes you're working to try to get aid on the ground, but the authorities that are in place, because they're they disagree between themselves, that's an additional administrative work to try to get aid to people, and that's really frustrating. But when it does get there, and you see how badly it's needed. I mean, in Yemen, you have 80% of the population that relies on emergency assistance. So when that does get there, it's heartwarming.
Mm-hmm. Wow. That's fascinating. I actually could listen to that for a little bit longer, but we have to move on and get some more perspective. So let me ask you this, Walter. You mentioned diversity before, and I noticed that we have some very new emergency managers. The majority have been operating between 1 to 3 years here. So what are some of the things that you would advise a new emergency manager to consider related to community and assessing the community before planning and understanding the community they're serving when they have less than 3 or 4 years on the job in emergency management? What would you recommend?
I think one of the biggest things I recommend is to understand what bias is and what bias we bring to the table. We all have backgrounds that we bring to the table, and that's our mindsets. But when you're coming to take care of a whole community or a whole different group of people, you need to leave those biases behind and then do what's best for the community. And you have to understand the community that you represent. In emergency management, we don't historically see really women or people of color that are then planning or doing things for that represents that group in the community. If you look at, there's a couple articles that have been written. One is like 7.5 traits of an emergency manager. And one of those talks about literally leaving that bias on the table and being able to think freely or look at your underrepresented populations. In the last couple storms that we've seen here in the US, especially in Florida, when we start talking about nursing facilities and which ones can get taken care of and which ones don't, and you can see where that bias plays a role. So the one thing I want to tell new emergency managers when they come in is your community represents everybody and everything, regardless of color of your skin, your gender, any of that. And you have to understand that you as one person or as an organization represent everybody. And you need to focus not so much on the squeaky one that gets the grease, because that's normally the most affluent population. It's the ones that you don't think about. Right now with COVID, we can see COVID is disproportionately affecting people of color. And right now with the vaccination of age, because they say go online, and some of the elderly don't have the computers or the technological knowledge to go register themselves. So you have to be understanding of that. So that's the one advice I'd give to new people coming in.
Mm-hmm. That's great advice. You know, that's the thing when you're a new emergency manager and you're faced with all of these mandates and you think that everything is equally a priority, and that is not so. As an emergency manager, we have to approach things using equity, and we have to look for need and address the need and understand our community's demographics, but also the existing inequities. And that will allow us to be more inclusive in our approach to emergency planning. Emily, what is your take? What is your advice to someone entering the field that might be coming in as a woman, and that might be, you know, coming into a very male-dominated environment, and learning to work in a setting where you might be the only woman, as we call it, professionally isolated. You're the only.
Yeah, absolutely.
Perspective.
It's difficult. I think that there really is a crossroads that the field is at right now. We have a large population of older, second career, you know, so previously retired law enforcement firefighters, military background that we've talked about already. And then there's the younger, traditionally, maybe not traditionally is the right term, but historically more educated in the concepts of emergency management. So less boots on the ground experience, more classroom experience, and finding a way to merge those two sort of concepts as much as you can is what's really going to help, I think. And so to take a little bit of a detour and talk a little bit more about my experience, I worked full-time at FEMA when I had my first local government internship. So I was in my late 20s. I had a full-time paying job, and I went in the evenings to the local government jurisdiction I ended up working for, Arlington, Virginia, and would be an intern with them in the evenings. And so I would do different projects for them. And that was how I started to learn how the office worked, started to get to know the personalities, and ultimately they hired me into that office. And that's how I really got my sort of street cred in emergency management, was working at the local level. So I say that to bring things around to the idea that I worked in a very heavily male dominated field, and the majority of our stakeholder, or the biggest stakeholders we had, were law enforcement and fire. So even if we didn't have those sort of older generation emergency managers in our office, those are our main stakeholders. And the ability to be flexible and to be respectful of other people's experience, especially first responders, is incredibly important. But I think once that respect is given and acknowledged, that that's the place you're starting from, it's incredibly important to have your own voice and to stand behind your voice. And that can be really hard. The place that I learned that the most was in rooms that I was with Walter. when we had Northern Virginia planning meetings and regular get-togethers, it was that community that we formed with our peers. So the other people at our level throughout the same geographical region. For me, that's what really helped me find my voice in emergency management, was talking with a lot of other women who were in that group, talking with Walter and other people who did not have the same law enforcement, military, fire service background. It was really the camaraderie and the team sense that we really developed helped me get through it.
I like that. Now, Walt, you're going to have to respond to that, because you bring up a great point, Emily, which is that in order to really, really excel as a woman, you have to have the support of your male allies. And it sounds like, Walt, you were a fantastic ally in really assisting in that effort to provide Emily with a voice. Can you talk about that and why it's important for you to do that?
Yeah, there's always a quote that I saw and on the wall in college, and I forget the person's last name. I think it was Greg Cassell, I believe. And I've shared it over the years, but it says, to be a great leader, you don't need a title, you need to have a heart. And if you always lead with your heart, people will follow, and you don't need the title to do that. And that's one thing, is anybody that knows me, when you first meet me, I'm very quiet, and I'm not quiet by nature, but I'm quiet because I want to learn who you are and what makes you tick and how I can help you, and then how you can help me. And then after we see that and we can form a friendship, then we're going to blossom together. I don't need to do well to step on you so I can do better. If we can help each other and we can both grow, we're going to get to the end result together. And this is really a team field. Nothing is done on your own, and you need that tribe, right? And EmilyJane was part of my tribe. She still is. And now you have that network. Now that she's moved to Denver and I'm still here, I can still call her. Like, her number didn't get deleted from my phone because she moved somewhere else. I can still text her if I have an issue. If I need to bounce ideas off of her, I can do that. Kristina's in a whole different country than me. And if I'd be like, hey, how do you guys do this differently? Give me a different perspective. Now that Kristina knows me, I can call her and we can have those conversations. I mean, I'm not going to call her at 1 a.m. like it is now, but I think we can work on that. So I think you have to remember, like, emergency management is really about the tribe. It's like you said, there's under 20,000 people really in the profession, and we're growing. We're changing from being a response-oriented field to being based off of science. And when you look at the science fields, they all work together, right? Like, they only have one title. It's just scientist. It doesn't matter what you're studying, it's all the same. And eventually emergency managers are going to be the same, whether you work in a hospital or you work at NASA or you work, I was in Honduras and we did medical trips to Honduras, and we actually worked with emergency management folks over there to go to some of the most calculated areas for the best results. So eventually we're going to be working together to all get to that same result with the same title. Because we're changing, the profession's changing, we're growing, we're learning. This year of COVID is helping us move forward. So we just have to remember, we're in a tribe, and we'll all get there together if we work together.
Wow, that's beautifully stated. And it's so important to really emphasize that emergency management is about relationships. You create tribes all over the place. We literally create networks all over internationally, and we love it because you get things done through partnership. I don't want to, Louis, Tammy, is there anything that you want to say or ask of this panel? I don't want to dominate the question. I'm sure it wasn't intended to be that way, but I always have a lot of questions. I'm curious.
Well, there are a couple of questions in here that I've left open just because I think the panel might have collectively a good way of answering it. One of them is something that actually I saw coming up through the ranks, and there seems to be two schools of thought of emergency management. One is emergency management as a response, and one is emergency management as an administrative role. And then, so the first being more of the retired firefighters, law enforcement, that kind of stuff. the latter being more of the new, higher education, that kind of role. And how do you kind of marry the two school of thoughts, and what opportunities should you be looking for that hit kind of both schools of thought?
Kristina, Walt, what are you thinking? I think Emily, you kind of alluded to that a little bit before. Kristina, Walt, do you guys want to jump in there and take a stab at it? It's kind of the new prototype meeting the older prototype, and the old is valuable, of course. And we don't say old, but it is changing. But that prototype is that paramilitary prototype is really what gave structure to the field. And now, as Walt said, it's moving at a rapid pace towards science and data and understanding information, evidence-based. So what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I think that the field is changing. Anybody that wants to go and look at it, George Howdow does a great job of talking about the 10 attributes of emergency manager. If you take those and we look at what essentially was the principles of emergency management, or what was needed, and we say that 5 years ago or even 3 years ago, it's completely different. George Howdow came out with those somewhere in the neighborhood of 2005, 2006, I believe, and they've kind of been revamped a little bit over the years. But that's because we're changing. That's because the field is changing, the profession is changing, the understanding is changing. Look at the laws that we had prior to Sandy, prior to Katrina. As we have these events, people are realizing the need and the necessity, and things are changing. What emergency management in 5 years is not going to be what it is today. What emergency management is today is not what it is 365 days ago. 362 days ago, I was preparing to get a test result to be the first case of COVID in Virginia and the third on the East Coast. What my job role is now, 362 days later, is completely different, and it's going to continue to grow. What Kristina talked about when she first was working in the United Nations to what it is now, and active war zones and active things, like how there hasn't been times before 15 years ago where we've had active war zones that have been going on for 10 years. We haven't seen destruction and really the growth of poverty from displacement of these crises. So we're going to continue to grow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I would add that, I can only speak for international emergency management, but I think it's the same. The field is becoming more and more professionalized, which means that we're not just looking for people with an emergency background, but with people with all kinds of skills. And so internationally, that means that when you're an emergency program manager, you might be just a program manager, but you might be specialized in food and nutrition to ensure that people can eat. You might be specialized in shelter management to ensure people have a roof. You might be specialized in water and sanitation so that people have clean water, toilets. You might be a doctor, you might be a nurse, or you might be a specialist in procurement and logistics to actually get the things that people need to the place where they need to be. And then you have a whole set of support roles that are just as important, things like communications. We need people to tell the story of what's happening. Fundraisers. Without money, there is no emergency response internationally, because most of it, the vast majority, is voluntary funded. You need human resources to get people to the places. You need to get the responders to the people. Admin, IT specialists to make sure these people can communicate. You need security people to ensure that this can be done safely, and so on and so on. And so that may be just one piece of advice when entering the field, is to kind of look at all these different types of careers inside emergency management and see what you're interested in, and what kind of what you need to what skills you need to get, or maybe you already have, so that you can target specific roles when you apply for jobs or internships.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, one of the things that I think is really valuable that the question brought up really quick is just those two different fields, the old and the new, and realizing that there's no specific way that says that you have to go one way or the other. If you find out you have mentors close by you who may be more approaching emergency management the old way, you feel like you can still learn different ways of planning, different ways of procedure, and then you feel like, you know, some of their experiences can help you shape your knowledge as you decide to go the educational route or you decide to go the volunteer internship route. Don't be afraid to leverage some of these relationships and leverage what's around you in your area to really push yourself forward, because that's what it's all about.
Mm-hmm. I like that. I like that. You know, what I'm hearing more so than anything is that we are experiencing a paradigm shift in emergency management. And the interesting thing about the paradigm shift is that it keeps shifting and it doesn't stay constant. And so when you're operating, entering and operating in the field of emergency management, you become accustomed to transition and change. And now with climate change and the understanding and the certainty that we are going to have more disasters, more frequent disasters, larger disasters that impact more people and vulnerable groups, we know that more than ever, the science is going to be critical, not only for predicting and predetermining, you know, resources and movements of people, but also in understanding how to improve the disaster response for the next disaster that's imminent. Isn't that crazy? We are living in a world of compounding disaster, and it's a great time to enter the field of emergency management. And all of us here, I think, can be counted on as a mentor. And as I wrap up tonight and I turn it back over to Tammy and to Lewis, I would just like to thank the panelists and thank you for your transparency, your honesty, and ask you if there is anything else that you would like to share with the participants who might be interested in coming into the field of emergency management and making the commitment to help people and dedicate their lives to service. What are your thoughts? Any final thoughts?
Well, I could say my path to emergency management has been an extremely long one and not a traditional one by any means. I went and got my associates, and then I did a whole bunch of volunteer work and was just living in heavy military towns, unable to get a leg up because of that. And I just continuously worked my full-time job because, you know, I still had a family to support, kids and that whole 9 yards. And I still managed to jump into a bunch of volunteer roles, which is where I ran into Kristina doing some field training exercises. Kept up with as many of the training classes, the FEMA ones or any of the free ones that I could find online. And then I stumbled into a mentor who took the time to tell me that when applying for jobs, I can't just go at this with a shotgun blast approach. I can't just apply for anything and everything that looks really good to me. I have to find that niche that I like, and I have to specialize myself in something and make myself more marketable. So one of the things that I love to do is I love training and education. So I picked up the training and exercise kind of little corner of this, and I ran with it and just started working more. All the volunteer roles that I had were with college consortiums doing field training exercises anyway. So I just built on that experience. And that's kind of where I found my niche, and my first paying job and my current paying job is working with 60 municipalities on training and exercise, making sure that they're meeting the state and federal guidelines. And that was literally my first job. And I love every day, every minute of what I do now. So definitely make sure you find that corner that you like and build upon it.
Fantastic. Anyone else? Last comments before we sign off.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you for everyone that's been participating in the question and answer feature. Tammy, I'm not sure if we wanted to share the screen with everyone's LinkedIn information, but we'll share the screens with everyone's contact information. And you can also be sure to follow, the Emergency Management Growth Initiative on LinkedIn, because this is where a lot of you may be specifically looking into this panel as one niche, but then we're also going to use that as a platform to post this recording, as well as making sure we share any future events. But everyone that's been active in the chat, we're going to, we tried to make sure we touched on all of your questions, but we're really happy to see the level of engagement that you had, not only with the panelists, but even with each other. And we're going to continue doing this, and hopefully over time you can reach out to any of us, and we'll be able to share a little bit of our time and give back to make sure that all of your questions are answered. Any ideas for different connections, we're going to try to use our resources to best service you. And like I said, EMGI will continue to put on these kinds of panels. So if you feel like you got other students and other friends and other relationships that you feel they can benefit from events like this, please feel free to share.
Yeah, building off what Lewis said. So on March 25th, I don't have my calendar in front of me, but that date sounds right. We will be doing a public health panel. So if you know anybody who has an interest in the public health field, go ahead and watch our LinkedIn page. The registration for that should be coming out in the next day or so. And then we're going to take a little bit of break to kind of regroup from these 4 panels. But then our next sessions are going to be on more in depth on how to land that job. It's going to be on volunteering and interning and resume writing and interview skills. And we're going to have kind of specialists in the industries to assist with those questions and answers. So definitely connect with us on LinkedIn. Keep an eye for just everything that we have up and coming.
Outstanding. All right, last comment from anyone else, from Walt, Kristina, EmilyJane, thank you so much. Any final comments? Thank you, Kristina. I see you put that in the chat, so thank you. Anyone else?
Maybe just a final word. I just want to share a few resources. So I put in the chat for those interested in international emergency management. Relief Web is the website that all of us use. You'll find their jobs, you'll find free trainings that sometimes come with certifications, you'll find information on crisis. It's a really good place to go. And then just want to say that right now, as many horrible things are happening with COVID, one opportunity is that a lot of things are happening remotely, which means that there's also remote volunteer opportunities, remote internships, and it's a good time to take advantage of that. Two resources there. One is if you type UN volunteer, you will find there's an online UN online volunteer. It's just a website that gathers a lot of online volunteer resources with international organizations. And then there's an actual UN volunteer, which is actually a paid job, which is a way to get into the UN for people who already have some experience. And sorry, just one last thing. The Red Cross is a great way in, because the Red Cross has international branches. So if you start working with the Red Cross or volunteering nationally, that's fantastic experience if you want to go internationally later. And thanks so much for having us. Great to be with you.
Thank you. All right, you guys, anything else? EmilyJane, Walter, final comment?
No, I think I agree with Kristina. Thanks for having us. This is great. And I think she hit the nail on the head when she said, right now, we're in a new times. Take advantage of this virtual life that we can, virtual internships, virtual learning, everything else. So I think just make the best of what you can. I think I saw something in the chat that says, hey, how can I do this when, I'm the breadwinner for my family? Well, if it's virtual, it doesn't matter when you do it. You can knock it out in the morning run, the evening after dinner, whenever. So take advantage of it. I think Kristina made a really good use of that. And thanks for having us. This was a great panel, and I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Outstanding. All right. Well, thank you all so much. EmilyJane, I don't want to leave you out.
Thank you. I just want to echo what Walter and Kristina said. Thank you for having us. This has been lovely, and I hope it's been very useful to all of you.
I know I've certainly learned a lot, and this organization has been absolutely tremendous. And I just hope that we see this organization grow. And my organization, the Institute for Diversity and Inclusion in Emergency Management, will work to support wherever we can, because this is what we do. We want to have more people come into the field. All right, so go team, go. One team, no scene. Hoorah. Can I steal that? I did. Okay. It's fine. All right. Well, everyone have a great night. Thank you so much, and stay safe out there. Take care. Bye.
Chauncia.
Bye. Thank you.
Y'all.
Thanks.